How's it going, folks? I'm here with Brother Jacob Prasch, and I just wanted to ask him a few questions about the situation down in the Middle East. So first of all, Brother Prasch, a lot of people right now are adhering to something known as replacement theology, and it's something shared by Jehovah's Witnesses, the Catholic Church. A lot of people share the view. I wanted you to comment on why we as Christians deny that theology has any place in Scripture.
What cults like the Roman Catholic Church do, and it is a cultic religion, or Mormonism does, or Jehovah's Witnesses do, is irrelevant. I only care what saved Christians do and teach. When saved Christians teach error, we have a problem. Romans chapters 9 to 11 make it absolutely clear that the Jews remain beloved for the sake of their fathers. Jesus additionally made it clear 3 times that God has an end-time purpose for national Israel and the Jews. The New Testament says in Matthew 23 and Luke 21 and Zechariah 12 also in the Old Testament, the Jews must be back in Israel and in Jerusalem for Christ to return. Replacement theology is simply not scriptural. We are told in Jeremiah 31:31, the New Testament would be made with Israel, the house of Israel and the house of Judah. Jesus never made a covenant with the church. Never. The new covenant was inaugurated at the Last Supper at a Jewish Paschal Seder. St. Paul confirms that the new covenant was made with Israel. In Romans chapter 9, he says to the Jews belongs, present continuous active in the Greek text, the covenants, plural, diatheke in Greek. I will debate any so-called scholar or theologian anytime, any place on the Greek text of Romans 9 to 11. Replacement theology is fundamentally unscriptural. Yes, Jews who reject Jesus are cut off from their own olive tree and are replaced by non-Jews who believe in him. However, God is not finished with Israel. The new covenant was made with Israel. If he's finished with Israel, he's automatically finished with the church because God never made a covenant with the church. Replacement theology, supersessionism, is fundamentally unbiblical, and those who teach it are teaching error. Come debate me in front of a camera. I challenge any one of them.
All right. So what would you say to the people that say that the individuals out in Israel are actually not part of the lineage of the tribe of Judah and actually are imposters, Ashkenazis from some type of place in Europe, and that it's a conspiracy, that this is happening, that it's not scriptural. In fact, Israel's evil and it's the synagogue of Satan.
First of all, let's understand where this theory came from. It was the Hazar Empire theory propagated in a book called The 13th Tribe by Arthur Kessler, who was himself Jewish. It was not an anti-Semitic theory to begin with. It was simply an anthropological theory that has been disproven by mitochondrial DNA. Mitochondrial DNA does not lie. We know that the DNA of Ashkenazi Jews and of Sephardic Jews and of Teimanim, Yemenite Jews, has the same signature source. Mitochondrial DNA, among other things, disproves the Book of Mormon, which says that North American Indians are ancient Near Eastern Semites. No, mitochondrial DNA shows that the Jews of today are the direct descendants of the Jews of the ancient world. People who say otherwise are ignorant of genetic biology, and they're usually bigots. I don't mind their ignorance, but their bigotry is something else. Nobody in the age of mitochondrial DNA can seriously believe such nonsense.
Okay, also, what would you say towards the Christians that have a sense of hostility towards the nation of Israel and in fact are kind of siding with Hamas, the Palestinian people, and kind of sympathizing with that? I mean, I understand that as Christians we don't want anybody to be murdered or anything like that. We have to show the kindness of God. But what would you say is a proper response of us as Christians when we see that this conflict is heated over there and that there's constant division over it?
I've been in the Middle East for years. Look what Boko Haram is doing to Christians in Nigeria. Look at the 3.4 million black African Christians who were murdered in Sudan and Darfur in 14 years by Afro-Arabs. Look at the realities of what happened to the Christians in Lebanon, the Falango, who were driven out of their land by Hezbollah. Look at this week and last week, ISIS beheading Christian children in Iraq and the murder of Christians in Syria. Look at what happened in Iran. 98%, it is estimated, 98% of evangelical pastors have been hung in Iran. Look at Saudi Arabia. They fund the construction of mosques and Islamic institutions all over the Western world, including the United States, but you can't build one church in Saudi Arabia. You can't even bring a New Testament into Saudi Arabia. If you become a Christian in Saudi Arabia, it is a capital crime. They will behead you or they will hang you. This is Saudi Arabia. There is not a single Islamic country in the world. Of the 57 Muslim countries in the world, there is not one that will give Christians the rights that Muslims get in the United States or in any Western democracy. And there's not one that will give the Jews the rights that Muslims get in Israel. I know what happens to Christians in Egypt, the Coptic Church. I know what happens to Christians even in moderate Muslim countries like Jordan. I know what happens to Christians in Iran, in Saudi Arabia, in Lebanon. I know what these people do. I know what Abu Sayyaf does in Asia. I know what Boko Haram does in Africa. I know what Hezbollah does in Lebanon. I know what Al-Qaeda does to Christians. I know what Hamas did to Christians in Gaza when they came to power, closed the Christian bookshops. I thank God as a Christian that there is one country in the Middle East, one, and only one, that protects the human rights and religious freedom of Christians, and that is Israel. These people who are singling out Israel for human rights abuses. Israel has the best human rights record in the Middle East. It's the only Western democracy in the Middle East. Find me a single other country in the Middle East or a single Muslim country anywhere in the world that has the human rights record of Israel. Christian rights, women's rights, human rights generally. I don't agree with homosexuality, but you know what happens to homosexuals and lesbians under Sharia? These people singling out Israel for standing up to the same radical Islam that beheads Christians are hypocrites. They're hypocrites and they're ignorant people. This is the reality of the fact. Hamas targets Israeli civilians and then uses their own civilians as human shields, forcing the Israelis to fire back in self-defense where there's going to be collateral damage. They openly admit it. Hamas, first of all, attacks Israeli civilians without any warning. That's 2 violations of international law. Then, although the Israelis warn and try to leaflet and warn people to flee, Hamas prevents their own people from fleeing and using their own as human shields. That's 4 violations of international law. You know, it's all based on a lie. Never in history has there been any such nation as Palestine except the ancient Philistines. That's what Palestine means. It's never even existed. These people are simply Palestinian Arabs. Up until the 1970s, those people in the West Bank were called Jordanians. Somebody waved a magic wand and they woke up the next day and somebody now told them they were Palestinians. There was no such thing before the 1970s. It is all made up. There's also this lie that they've taken the Muslim Arab land. Archaeology doesn't lie. Politicians lie. Archaeology doesn't. An Apache cannot occupy Arizona. A Maori cannot occupy New Zealand. An Irishman cannot occupy Dublin or Tipperary. Neither can a Jew occupy Bethlehem, East Jerusalem, or Nablus. The archaeological record shows that they are the indigenous people. The only thing they're guilty of is standing up to the same radical Islam responsible for the Twin Towers coming down September 11th. The same radical Islam that's kidnapped Christian girls and sold them into slavery in northern Nigeria. The same radical Islam that has genocidally slaughtered in the Holocaust the Christians of Sudan. The same radical Islam that murdered over 340,000 Christians in East Timor. The same radical Islam. The only thing they're guilty of is what every civilized nation should be guilty of. Standing up to fundamentalist, jihadist Islam that this very week is beheading Christians. Look what they've done in Sydney, Australia with their riots. Look what they've done in Paris, France with their riots. Look what they did September 11th. Look what they did in Bradford, England with their riots. That is the reality of fundamentalist Islam. That is what Israel is dealing with. Anybody who objects to their defending themselves from radical Islam are either stupid, bigoted, or both.
All right. We only have about 4 minutes left, but just briefly, if you can comment on the U.S. hostility now towards Israel, and also, you know, the Bible talks about an isolation of Israel in the end of days. Does that somehow fulfill Bible prophecy that a nation like the U.S. that was kind of backing up Israel
has made it clear in chapter 10 that Iran would emerge as a strategic threat to the Western world and to Israel in the last days? Yes, the Obama administration has repeatedly pandered to Iran, allowing Iran to continue the development of nuclear weapons, which they will undoubtedly give to terrorists for surrogate terrorism. So you'll have Islamic terrorists with the capacity, which they will use if they have the opportunity, to set off nuclear devices, and then the rest of the Muslim world will say, we don't agree with this. This is not Islam, because the corrupt American and other Western governments will not stand up to Iran while there's still time. Well, God will deal with Iran. Read the book of Daniel. The Obama administration is unprincipled. The Bush administration was in bed with the Saudi Arabian Wahhabists. Our own government are political whores. They pander to the oil lobby. They pander to anything and everything. Remember, nations get the governments they deserve. No, I don't think Israel is without blame. I don't think the Israeli government is immune from criticism. Either do most Israelis. But the open lies you hear in the left-wing media and in left-wing academia is absurd. It's a pack of lies. Radical Islam is as much a threat to America and to Europe and Australia and Western civilization as it is to Israel and the Jews.
Thanks a lot, brother. Thanks so much.